was something that David and I at BitAngels, primarily David's leadership, and a young man called J.R. Willett came up with this crazy idea that we're going to talk about in a little time here. I'm still on French time. But again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for putting up with all the little logistical issues that probably we stress out more than you do. But the one thing that Coin Agenda has always looked to be from the very first moment that I started in 2014 was to be the Goldman Sachs or SALT conference for crypto. Because the investment bankers aren't going to start a real public blockchain conference, so I figured that it was a good legacy for like BitAngels and for some of the other things that I've been trying to do to really go in and have a place that not only the old timers, but the people who are in the new funds, in the family offices, can go in and have the entire conference just be about investing and not about programming and consensus mechanisms and things like that. Some of it will come up tangentially, but really we're here to talk about all the different aspects of investing in this disruptive, earth-shaking technology that's called blockchain that was born of Bitcoin. So without further ado, David. On the logistical side, we're going to try to get this podium moved to the other side so we can see, or we can see us a little bit better, but I guess in the meantime we'll just have to pull up, and if anybody sees a few empty seats on this side wants to come over, feel free. So, welcome.
Nice to see you, Mike.
Nice to see you. So, I'm just going to wing this thing. So, let's flash back to, I think, the place that most people met other folks, which was May of 2013. And the price of Bitcoin had started the year at $13, had gone up to an unbelievable 240, and everybody said that was unsustainable. And then it crashed back down to 50, and then it was hovering around the 120 range, I believe, when we met. And there was in the room, a great keynote by Eric Voorhees. A lot of Roger Ver was there. We ended up coming up with the idea on the rooftop of the first night's party of putting together a group called BitAngels, so that people in the space, we were thinking at that point that the big guys would get into it anytime soon, to find these walled companies and exchanges all over the world and try to invest. And we ended up basically just putting a post on Reddit, and got 35 people to show up, and in a couple of weeks we had several hundred people. And BitAngels right now is kind of retooling a little bit and trying to figure out how to go and make it into more of a city network where in between Coin Agenda events you can have people in a room seeing pitches, which are now probably 90% ICO and not Bitcoin wallets. So I guess first kind of open-ended question is, how do you see sort of the investing potential and the investing world since those early days when you were having to go and buy Bitcoin at a CVS for $5 a shot to Mt. Gox?
Well, things have certainly come a long way. I think we really spent a lot of time in those early days in 2013 and 14 talking about infrastructure, right? I mean, there weren't Coinbase yet, or they had just come onto the scene, and BitPay, a lot of the merchant providers were just coming onto the scene. And so those early days were really dominated by, we need all the basic pieces to come together so that this ecosystem can serve people. And bringing the BitAngels together in 2013 was great, because I remember your famous question to me, why isn't there an angel group in Bitcoin yet? I was like, well, let's start one. And you're like, okay, we'll call it BitAngels, and the rest is history. But that sort of gave us a platform to evaluate all of these new technologies and all these projects. You alluded to Mastercoin and what JR started earlier, and that was through BitAngels. Basically, the state of the art at the time was you literally just made a post on Bitcoin Talk, hey, I'm doing this project, and send some Bitcoin to this address. And I remember JR wanted to pitch the BitAngels, and he approached us 4 days before the end of his software sale. And so I basically spent 4 days straight evaluating the technology, trying to understand this idea that he had for putting assets on the blockchain, right? It was the first project to issue tokens onto Bitcoin and allow people to create other tokens, which is a bit of controversial at the time. Tokens, other than Bitcoin. Like, you have to remember, this is a world in which 95% of all value in crypto was Bitcoin. And so he eventually convinced me that the technology made sense and that there definitely was a market for other tokens, which I've been thinking about. And glad we got involved there, and it really sort of set a lot of the early precedents. I encouraged him to start a nonprofit foundation, to handle the funds, to put everything in escrow with multiple people involved in holding the tokens so that none of them went missing. All those basic things you think about you sort of take for granted today in a software sale, is there's going to be escrow and multi-sig and a foundation and a written mission. We sort of got a chance to be involved in setting a lot of those early precedents. So we've come a long way. I'm excited about all the infrastructure now that exists that makes it a lot easier. And I'm seeing people from 2013 and 14, which sort of passed on the software model, but all of a sudden now that Ethereum is around and you have all these other tools, they can come back and say, oh, I can see how I could build this into a decentralized system. So that's really encouraging to me. The new platforms like Polymath for securities, I know they're here out of Toronto, and as well as all Ethereum has done with decentralized applications, has made it a lot easier than it used to be. So it's still early days, but it's pretty exciting how far we've come.
So speaking of Ethereum, so we're going to start walking up from, that was August of 2013 that Mastercoin came out as the first ICO. And then Q1 of 2014, you approached me and a couple other folks with the idea of having a digital currency fund. So a lot of people don't realize the very first digital currency fund was originally called BitAngels Fund 1. I think that's still the official legal name in Delaware, and then sort of renamed the DApps Fund. And and I know your idea, since you were the main driving force, and we took only crypto in. We took Bitcoin, Mastercoin, and Counterparty, and we paid the tokens out as soon as they got issued. Now, had we been a traditional fund and sort of held on for a 7 to 10 year period, we probably would have been the single most profitable fund ever, because the $6 million that we raised, $2 million went to MaidSafe, which was around 0.7 cents, it's 35 cents now. $1 million went into Ethereum, which is obviously up at 1000x, and then Factom and Storage. Pretty good track record there for picking them, since you were the main person going out and traveling around the world. I mean, MaidSafe, you literally visited Scotland and looked under rocks for interesting crypto companies. So I'd say when the Ethereum crowd sale came out, though, it wasn't certain that was gonna, there's a lot of ups and downs. I mean, we launched them from a PR perspective at CES in 2014, and reporters kind of yawned. I mean, a couple weeks later, when it was more of a Bitcoin crowd at the first New York or Miami Bitcoin, the North American Bitcoin Conference, then people had a chance to read the white paper. But when it was sort of like Wired and the New York Times and folks like that, they were all agog at a Bitcoin ATM, you mean I can actually get that wallet out? So it took a little while for that to come. But what are your memories sort of the Ethereum crowd sale and kind of what that did? You mentioned Mastercoin, now Omni, as being the first token. Probably, arguably, a big part of the $35 billion market cap of Ethereum now is the fact that they have ERC20 tokens that has really ignited this whole ICO fever. So walk us through sort of your involvement and sort of thoughts then and now on Ethereum.
Sure. So in December of 2013, got a chance to co-author the General Theory of Decentralized Applications with Michael and Sam and a number of other authors. And basically we proposed this idea that we could use this Bitcoin model of open source, a digital token, a peer-to-peer network, and a blockchain backend for things that were more than payments or more than coins. And so we outlined ideas around decentralized storage and decentralized compute, and the idea of applying this model more broadly. And so that idea of a decentralized application really caught on. And that's sort of how Ethereum built itself in the early days, as a platform for decentralized applications. I remember talking a lot with Vitalik at the time, and originally he was thinking mostly of just mining the Ethereum tokens, but we had a lot of conversations, and I put forth that there's a different demographic of people that have capital and they want to support the project too. And you should probably give some of the tokens to developers because they're the people coding this up and they actually can contribute a lot themselves. It's not just Hashbroker. And so I was glad when he adopted that model and put that forth for the Ethereum sale. I did the original due diligence and informational report on Ethereum. Though Brock gets the credit for putting the million in to Ethereum in the early days. I think what he was really trying to do was create liquidity in the market and really help bootstrap it up. It was a really exciting time. And so, Ethereum coming onto the scene offered this new platform, and then we could see things like Augur and all of the projects there. Oh, all of a sudden I can run a script or run any program I want on a blockchain. This really opens up a whole new dimension. And so it created an ecosystem outside of those that were interested in store of wealth or payment systems, and really drew in a whole new community of developers around that time. But I think they really set the gold standard at the time. They set up a foundation in Switzerland. They did a lot of jurisdictional and compliance work with Perkins Coie and other law firms, I believe, and they really got comfortable that the way they were structuring it was not a security, and that it was clearly a utility token, and that they were following all the correct rules, and they were structuring everything correctly. And so they did a great job and really deserve a lot of credit. Anthony for funding a lot of that, Vitalik for inventing it, and Charles and Gavin and all the others that came and helped refine the idea. But it was a fun time in 2014 to be there for all that. And as you mentioned, we were a pretty non-traditional 18-month vehicle, and it was really about taking crypto, putting it into crypto projects, and then just returning a diversified set of tokens back to the limited partners. But yeah, I think it worked out well. Hopefully, a lot of folks held on to those tokens.
So let's talk a little bit about Factom, because that was from the same crowd sale. And I would have expected after the success of the dApps fund that you would go on and start making funds and things like that. But you really kind of settled in on. I know you're obviously a very active angel. I mean, we're both in Polymath and other tokens, and you're a very active advisor. But you're really kind of doubling down on Factom right now, and of course, with you putting your attention on that, it only has the token gone up about 100x in value since the ICO. But you're one of the very few companies that also was able to not only have the token go up, but really I think the first company that had a token sale and then afterwards did a sort of for-profit venture back with Tim Draper and Austin Ventures, and if you take the token part out, you look like a successful software company. And Tim once said you're going to be bigger than Oracle and a few other companies combined. So tell us a little bit about the thoughts between kind of the split there, because I think that was a historic moment that a lot of people have been doing, although now all of a sudden a lot of people are just sort of putting everything into for-profits in the Caymans so that it's just a zero tax. And sort of what's been kind of keeping your fertile brain busy with Factom lately?
So the reason that I got so interested in Factom, and this is in mid-2014, Paul Snow and I, Paul's the inventor of the Factom technology, we were hanging out at the Miami Bitcoin conference, and I was challenging him, why can't we decentralize these aspects of operating systems and all these high-level programs? And he says, David, before you can do any of that, you have to have a decentralized identity layer. And then he thought about it for a while, and he's really, even before that, you need a generalized way to validate lots of data on a blockchain, right? That is the root problem you have to solve to scale blockchains. Is you need not a few 100,000 transactions a day, you need the ability to secure millions or even billions of data points to a blockchain. And so his inspiration was to anchor these large data sets to the blockchain, and with that, he basically solved the scalability problem. The reason Factom ended up winning all these enterprise contracts with Department of Homeland Security, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, banks and insurance companies, is because we have a solution that can go into production, because they can secure extremely large data sets. And before that, basically most people are stuck in proof of concept land, right? If you can only do 300,000 Bitcoin transactions a day, and you're talking to some big banks trading unit, and they say, hey Dave, we do about 1 billion trades a day. Can we put that on the blockchain? And you have to tell them, no, you cannot put that directly onto Bitcoin or directly onto Ethereum. And so the banks that have been experimenting with blockchain have mostly been stuck in, okay, we're going to do a sandbox or a private version or a proof of concept. But Factom's already secured 120 million records to the blockchain. As far as I'm aware, it's by far the largest second layer that's securing large data sets to Bitcoin, and we've coded up the anchors for Ethereum. And so by solving that scalability problem, my passion was really because that unlocks everything else. That gets the rest of the world on the blockchain by solving that one core issue. And yeah, Peter Kirby and Paul Snow and the team at Factom have done a great job. And we ended up with this hybrid model where there's a for-profit that's building proprietary software, APIs that make the open source easy to use, interfaces that are easy for auditors or bankers to log in on the website and just click document, check document, things like that. You need those layers to reach enterprise. You need those layers to reach a broader audience. Most people don't have a giant slew of developers on their team, most banks or financial companies. And beyond that, most of them aren't willing to put in a lot of time to use open source. They want something they can literally buy, click install, and get it running, or at least a sales engineer shows up at their establishment and helps them get it running. And so you need that handshake from the open source world to the proprietary world. And so now we've seen this with a lot of companies. You think about Ethereum, Consensus. What Joe Lubin has done is built a for-profit on Ethereum. He's one of the co-founders, brought in a lot of great developers, and they're building stuff for for-profit companies on top of the open source, right? You think about this model and you start to see it all over the place now is, yes, it's really important to keep the base layer open source, but you still, wherever that decentralization cannot get past, where you need somebody actually holding their hand to get it done, there you need a for-profit.
So let's around that same time you were on the circuit and we're talking about something you called Johnston's Law, which was anything that can be decentralized will be decentralized. Would you say decentralization is still the key, or do you think it's tokenization? Because it seems like you mentioned what Joe's doing at Consensus and what some other tokens are doing these days, where you're kind of having like the internet, was all open source, but the real money's been made on Google and what they call the stacks on top of that. What is the role of sort of the tokenized stacks that aren't necessarily purely decentralized, that are controlled by a company or a consortium, or I know there's private blockchains, public blockchains. I mean, what are your thoughts on sort of the, not just public blockchains, but just public blockchains being purely decentralized versus, there are obviously some ones that are out there that, are pre-mined, that, their proof of stake is oftentimes a small group of folks. What are your thoughts on sort of decentralization versus stacks in the next couple of years?
Well, my view is that we're building up in tech layers. In almost all technology and software, you end up having a technology stack that, like you said, starts at the protocol level, goes up to the platform level, and eventually ends up at the application layer. And so we spent a lot of time in 2013 and 14 building protocols, and it feels like now we're getting more into platforms. I think decentralization is going to move further and further up as there are enough tools to support it. So, you couldn't have built something like Augur without Ethereum. But now that Augur exists and Ethereum exists, as Augur matures, then you have people building on top of Augur things that are fully decentralized. It's just a really beautiful model that there isn't an intermediary, and so you remove all of that sort of captured profit, and it's a pure peer-to-peer system. That's really attractive, and if you think about the unicorns in this space, Coinbase wasn't the first. Ethereum was the first. And in fact, by the time Coinbase did reach $1 billion valuation, there were 10 other projects, all who were open source using tokens, that had also reached more than $1 billion. So in this space, we have sort of the opposite of what you would expect. There are 10-to-1 unicorns on the token and open source side as there are to the private company side. So it'll be interesting to see as we move up the tech stack whether that ratio continues to be true.